Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video I decided that because the next book in the ACOTAR series is coming out at the end of this year, and then we're getting the I think it's like the 5th and 6th book in the series. Yeah, are coming out at the end of this year. I thought I would do my own personal reading guide for anyone who wants to get into the SJM universe or wants to get caught up before, like maybe you started it and you just want to get caught up before the next couple of books come out. Because there is a lot of books in this universe and all of them are quite thick. So you need to kind of know how you want to go at the series. So I'm going to do this in 2 separate ways. If you just want to be able to get caught up so you can read the ACOTAR series, I'll do that one. But if you want to do the entire universe, I'll also do that as well. So to start off with, obviously, if you're someone who's new to fantasy and hasn't read much fantasy before and you're a bit nervous about it, and like me, you were someone who was a big romance reader before you started reading fantasy books and you just want to get a bit of a taste for it, or if you're someone who loves reading fantasy but don't know where to start with the SJM universe, I would definitely always recommend starting with the ACOTAR series. So this is what I would say SJM's easiest and also least high stakes series to read. So this is the book series that will be getting the next 2 books in it. I know it's a book 5 and 6, and that's because this one here is actually a novella, so it's not classed as like an actual like full physical book. So the way you read this series is you start with A Court of Thorns and Roses, then A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Wings and Ruin, then the novella, which is A Court of Frost and Starlight, and also A Court of Silver Flames. And you do need to read the novella in this series to then go on to A Court of Silver Flames, because the novella is a transition book from these 3 into this one. The reason why I say this one is the least high stakes series out of the lot is because this one is very much more a romantasy series. The other series do have romance subplots in them, and they do have some romance in them, but it's not the biggest part of the story. Whereas with the ACOTAR series, it's romance. Romance is a big part of it, and love is a big aspect of the series, and also things to do with the characters. With this series, obviously, you start with A Court of Thorns and Roses. So basically, this story follows Feyre, who is a young girl who comes from a poor family, and she is basically in the woods and she has to find a way to get enough food to be able to feed her family. And also get enough gold so she can afford to buy food. So she kills a wolf, but it ends up being the wrong wolf. And because of this, she ends up getting taken captive by a High Lord. And while she's struggling with her feelings for this High Lord, she is basically not prepared for the fact that there's something else going on in this fairy world that she doesn't know she's going to be able to survive. And it's basically, in a sense, it's kind of a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Now, don't let that put you off, because it does have like the aspects of that, but it is its own story. And this series is so good. I absolutely adore this series. I read this for the first time in 2024, and I am currently rereading the ACOTAR series just because I want to be prepared for when the new books come out. So yeah, with this series, the first 3 are kind of, I would guess you'd say, like a trilogy, because these 3 follow the same characters. And then this little novella is kind of like the transition book from the 2 characters the characters that you follow in this one to the other characters that you follow in this one. You still meet the characters that you follow in this one, you meet in the first 3 books, but it's all still part of the same story, but it's just from the perspective of other characters within the world. And genuinely, I think this one is my favourite in the series just because I absolutely adore this book and I relate to the main character of this book very much. So yeah, it's based with reading the SJM universe, you do really need to read these ones first, especially obviously if you're reading this because you do want them, you are waiting for the next SJM books to come out in this series. And these are just the most easily digestible books within her world. Now, if you just want to read this series and then go on to book 6 and 7, you do need to read another one of SJM series before you go on to that. So if you just want to be able to just read the ACOTAR series and still fully understand everything, you will need to read the Crescent City books before the next ones come out. Because with the Crescent City books, something that happens in the third book in the series, which is House of Flame and Shadow, it relates to the ACOTAR series. So you need to read this series and also know what happens in here, because if you go to just the next books in the ACOTAR series, you're probably going to be confused about the things that have happened in this third book, because characters will probably be mentioned and you'll be like, who on earth are these people? So if you do just want to read the ACOTAR series and read the next book in the series, but you don't want to miss out on any information, then after you've read the ACOTAR series, you will need to go on to Crescent City. However, if you want to do it the long way, like I did, then you have an entire other series to be reading before you move on to Crescent City. Now, you don't have to do it this way. This is just what I personally preferred doing. So after I read the ACOTAR series, I moved on to SJM's biggest series. We have the Throne of Glass series. Now, this is SJM's biggest series and also has some of the, actually I think this has the longest book in it that she's written. So after reading ACOTAR, I went on to the Throne of Glass series before I went on to Crescent City. And you don't technically have to read this series before to get on to the next ACOTAR books, but I personally would just recommend it because this gives you more of an in-depth view of SJM's more high fantasy worlds and also more of the depth that she goes into. So there's a lot of controversy on the internet on how you're meant to read the Throne of Glass series. I'm going to tell you my personal preference for how I read the series that I always recommend for people. Now, the reason there's so much controversy is because, oh gosh, of this one little book. Jesus, the books are all just falling on top of me. 1 second. So this one little book is a book full of 5 novellas. And this book is actually set before the story of Throne of Glass starts off. And this is the backstory to the main character who you meet in the first book, Throne of Glass, Selena. So this is a little book of 5 novellas, and reading this gives you her backstory, a little bit of her backstory and how she gets to where she is at the start of the first book. So the reason that this book causes so much controversy within the way that people say you should read the Throne of Glass series is because some people say you should read this book first, some people say you should read this book third, some people say fourth. And there's so many different reading guides on the internet and a lot of people have very strong opinions about it. And I'm one of those people as well. I won't force people to read it in any specific way, but this is how I personally think you should read this series. So if you're someone like me who hates when you're in the middle of a series and then all of a sudden you have to go back and read a book that doesn't continue where you are in the series, but gives you backstory on a character, I find that really frustrating because I just want to continue with the story, how everything's going to happen next. And if I have to go back and read backstory, it'll honestly make me not want to continue the series. And that is why I decided to read The Assassin's Blade first. because like I said, this is a book of 5 little novellas that basically give you some backstory onto Selena, who is the main character, and how she gets to where she is in the first official book in this series, which is Throne of Glass. And yeah, people will probably argue with me saying, no, that's the wrong order. But I just personally think it gives you the better experience to read this first. So then you can understand Selena's motives as she goes through the books and goes through the series, and how she ends up where she is at the start of book 1 in the series. Because I feel like if I hadn't read this first and I'd just gone in with that one, I would have been really confused about where we were with this character. But reading this first meant I understood. So when going into it, I say read these ones first. So go Assassin's Blade, Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, and then Queen of Shadows. And then once you've read these ones, we then have these 2 very chunky books, Empire of Storm and Tower of Dawn. Now, some people say you don't have to do the tandem read, just read Empire of Storms, then read Tower of Dawn. I personally say that you should do the tandem read, and I have a very specific reason as to why. So with these 2 books, these are happening at the exact same time, but they are following 2 separate groups of characters following their own different journey during the same timeline. So while the stuff that's happening with certain characters in this book, different stuff is happening with different characters in this book, but it's all at the same time. And the way that Empire of Storm ends, it ends on a pretty big cliffhanger. And if you read that and then you have the cliffhanger and then you have to go and read this one, which is how many pages is this book? Let me look. So this is 660 pages. So if you have to go from this, which has a big cliffhanger at the end of it, to reading this and not finding out what happens next with the characters that you got the cliffhanger from this book in, to then have to wait from reading all of this to then go on to Kingdom of Ash, if you're like me, you're just going to get really frustrated because you're going to want to know what happens straight away, because the cliffhanger at the end of this book, if you're as emotionally invested in the characters as I was when I was reading, you're not gonna want to have to read a 600-page book. And don't worry about knowing what to do with the tandem read. There is a guide online which I use to basically know which chapters I need to read at which point, and I will link that in the description below if you want to follow the tandem read guide. Now, I know it seems pretty daunting because these are 2 very thick books, and it's like basically you're reading like an over 1,000-page book when you're reading these at the same time. But if you don't do the tandem read, like I said, whatever happens at the end of Empire of Storms, you're going to have to wait over 600 pages before you can find out what's going to happen next when you read Tower of Dawn. Which is what happened to a lot of people who were reading this series as it came out, because Empire of Storms happened, then Tower of Dawn happened, and people had to then wait for Kingdom of Ash to come out. I'm so happy that I read this series after the entire thing was out, because I feel like if I had to do that, I would have cried. But yeah, doing the tandem read, in my personal opinion, is the best route to go down, because once you've done the tandem read, then you only have the last book in the series, which is Kingdom of Ash, which is the biggest book, which I think is the biggest SJM book out of all of them. This book is incredible and heartbreaking. I'm not going to go into details because obviously I do not want to spoil anything for anybody if you want to read this universe. But once you've read ACOTAR, if you want to get a more in-depth view of what SJM's writing is like, and also be in this beautiful world and get more used to the world building, then I would definitely say go on to Throne of Glass next, which, yes, is a big commitment, but it is what it is. And then after I read Throne of Glass, that is when I did make a start on Crescent City. So obviously there is 3 Crescent City books, and these ones are very different to ACOTAR and Throne of Glass, because they are more, I like to describe them as like Regency fantasy, because it's not set in like a modern world. So these ones are obviously like your normal kind of fantasy that you expect, like with the like corsets and fancy dresses and things like that. Whereas the Crescent City series is a urban fantasy. So this one has more of the normal things. You're still a fantasy world and it still has fantasy things in it, but it has more of the normal things that you would see in like our world. So it has like phones, pizzas, cars, like technology that you would see like nowadays. But obviously it's a bit more advanced because it's in a fantasy world. So this one is honestly quite different to the other two series. But like I said before, the Crescent City series and this one are connected. Honestly, all of SJM's worlds are connected, and you slowly learn that as you go through the stories because you pick up on the little Easter eggs, which is something that I personally loved when I was reading the series. But when reading it, I liked going from Throne of Glass to Crescent City because I was already used to SJM's writing by that point, because I had read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus 8, God, maths, 13 books by that point. So I kind of already knew what her writing was going to be like. So when I went into a different kind of fantasy world that I hadn't read before, because I hadn't read urban fantasy before, it was a lot easier for me to grasp the universe and also go into it. And also, like, I will say that with these ones, it's a bit different in the sense of the Crescent City series does follow more characters and different points of view and different storylines within the 3 books and what happens in the ACOTAR series and also Throne of Glass. Because in ACOTAR, the first 3 books follow one person's point of view, and then the 4th book follows another character's point of view, but they're all still within the same world, and you've already learned about this character slowly as the books have gone on before you move on to their perspective. And then Throne of Glass is all basically from one person's point of view. So you kind of are following along in this story with just like this one set group of characters, and it doesn't really jump around. Whereas with the Crescent City series, it jumps around from the points of view of different characters and different things going on in certain areas. So it can get a bit jumbled. It's still an incredible series. I do absolutely love Crescent City. I just think personally for me, it's not my favourite. For me, my favourite series is the Throne of Glass series. But I also just have such a special place in my heart for the ACOTAR series and also Crescent City because I think they are absolutely incredible. But that is beside the point. That's just me gushing about my god tier books because of how much I love them. But anyway, yes, as I was saying before I went on to that little side tangent, that is basically how I would recommend people go into the SJM universe. So if you do just want to do the ACOTAR series and you want to be prepared for when you go on to the next books, I would say read the ACOTAR series and then read the 3 Crescent City books, just because there's, like I said, there's things that happen in the 3rd book that relate to the ACOTAR series, and you want to know the information that you learn in this book to be able to understand what's going to happen next in the 5th and 6th book in the ACOTAR series. Or is it 6 and 7? I'm not sure. Because technically, A Cut of Frost and Starlight is a novella. I think it's 5th and 6th book, yeah. But I think people are calling it 6 and 7. But I don't freaking know. Anyway, before the next books in the ACOTAR series come out, you do kind of need to read Crescent City first, just so you can fully understand what's going to be happening in the next couple of books. But if you do want to do the entire SJM universe, then here is definitely what I recommend you do. So, like I said, start with the ACOTAR series. It's the easiest to grasp. It's a fun little series. It's not as high stakes as the other books. And it's just a fun way to understand SJM's writing and get a little bit of a feel for it, of what she does. Then move on to the Throne of Glass series. If you're like me, like I said, you're like me and you don't like having to go back when you're in the middle of the series, I would say read the Assassin's Blade first, so you have the backstory of the main character, and then after you've done that, you go on to Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, and Queen of Shadows. Then once you've done that, like I said, do the tandem read, just because you don't want to get to the end of this one and then have to read a 600-page book before you find out what happens next after the end of this book. And then obviously the last book in the series is Kingdom of Ash. A lot of people take a break after they do the tandem read before going on to Kingdom of Ash, and that's just because, like, it's a big commitment reading this book, because Kingdom of Ash is... Do this. 1 second. ...980 pages. And then once you've done that, then go on to the Crescent City series to have more of a look into SJM's universe, and also be able to fully understand what's going to happen next when the next ACOTAR books come out. I definitely would not recommend just going straight in with Crescent City or going straight in with Throne of Glass. If you're someone who's read a lot of fantasy and you don't mind world building, then yes, go straight in with Throne of Glass if that is what you want. And if you're not a big person who likes a lot of romantasy within your books, then yes, do just go on to Throne of Glass, because that is the most high fantasy book series that she has. But if you're someone who wants to just a taste of SJM's universe, or like I said, you are new to reading fantasy, then definitely start with ACOTAR. But don't start with Crescent City, because I knew someone who started with Crescent City and hadn't read any other SJM books, and then when they got to this book, they were thoroughly confused, because some of the references that are said in this book relate to the ACOTAR series, so you're just going to get confused. But yeah, that is my personal reading guide for anyone who wants to get into the SJM universe. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, comment and subscribe, and hit that little notification bell below so you know when I upload. I upload every Wednesday at 5 p.m. I'm kind of struggling with coming up with content at the minute. I'm going to try and stick to my weekly schedule, but if sometimes I do miss videos, I am sorry, but it's just how it is sometimes. But yeah, that is it for today. I will catch you guys next time.